Today we're building the biggest location in all of Warhammer, the Imperial Palace on Terra. We've made some good progress on this build so far, and in our last video we were about to begin doing some plastic kit bashing. All of these sprues and all our bits and just layer in detail until my wife stuck her head in the door and said she thinks she's going into early labor. So we're gonna leave it there for today. So back in December we did have the baby, a beautiful third baby girl, because apparently I'm all about that girl dad life, and now here in February we finally get to pick up where we left off, although we've come to a bit of a crossroads with this build. So this is basically where we stand. We've got a massive wall, a huge trench, and then the foundation of our city sector. And this whole first chunk of our Imperial Palace megaboard has to be finished by mid-March because of some sneaky reasons. So what do we still need to do? Well, over the baby break, my plans for this board got even bigger. This wall and the trench are now going to continue all the way around the city. We'll need more gates and bridges through here, build a full upper city, increase the outer city density by a lot, build an underhive that connects to all the bridges, and a network of elevators to join all three city levels together. And we've got 3 weeks to get it done. Cool. Let's get crafting. So I know a lot of you guys get a bit frustrated sometimes about how long it takes me to finish these massive builds. So in today's video, in the face of the huge amount of work left to be done on this board, I'm going to try and take a different approach, and let me know in the comments below if you think it's a winner. Instead of leveling up a whole bunch of the build at the same time from the ground up, I'm going to try and get part of this build to a pretty semi-finished stage so we can all get hyped about where this is going. And I'm going to begin with the massive gatehouse and rampart. It's the part of the board that really personifies the Imperial Palace the most strongly, so I think it's going to G us all up nicely. With the foundation of that upper city now finished, it's time to begin work on the part of the build I've been looking forward to the most: kit bashing some armored battlements for the palace walls. Assembling the buildings we have so far from the epic scenery kits has left me with a heap of floor tiles and the smaller size of walls, so I thought they were the perfect way to reinforce our battlement and get a little bit of that epic scenery flavor into our foam carved build. This massive volcano cannon emplacement from a Shadow Sword or Baneblade kit is also a super imposing feature on our first section of wall, and it makes a nice focal point to build around, which I then jutted out over a foam plinth, and by overhanging the battlements, I can then use a second set of low walls sloped up underneath to create some machicolation gun ports to cover the huge trench and also help accent the form of the walls nicely. We actually had our very first snow of the year last week in February, and winter is the perfect time to cozy up at home with a mobile game you can really get stuck into. I've discovered this amazing game that's available on both mobile and PC, and in this game there's over 800 incredible champions: elves, orcs, dwarves, demons, and each one looks exceptionally cool. The worlds of Raid Shadow Legends and Monster Hunter are colliding for an amazing crossover, running from January 9th to March 5th, with players being able to collect 5 Monster Hunter themed legendary champions within Raid Shadow Legends. The 5 champions are based on iconic Monster Hunter monsters: Rathalos, Zinogre, Alatreon, Fatalis, and Ruiner Nergigante. Everyone will be able to get the Rathalos Blademaster legendary champion for free simply by logging into Raid for 7 days between now and March 5th. Players can get the other 4 Monster Hunter themed champions via in-game special events. If you haven't started playing yet, what are you waiting for? Click my link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses only available via my link. You'll immediately receive 500k silver, energy and chicken, and then an epic Juliana after reaching level 15. She is a boss killer and attack type warrior wielding the magic affinity, and thus very powerful against enemies with affinity. Come and find me under the name Zorpazorp, join my clan Zorptrons, and we'll be legends together. So hit my link in the description and I'll see you on the battlefield. I then use some upside down large epic scale walls and a few buttresses from the old Cities of Death kits to further help integrate the foam and plastic components. Then I knocked up the second half of our first battlement, varying the shape and the height of the defenses for some visual interest and to kind of build up towards the massive height of our rampart tower. More machicolations really tie it all together, and then it's time for some more Dakar. And this is basically every spare weapon that I can find in my bits box, which should see the defenses reasonably well armed. I started adding some more details to the battlements with a backside of the Baneblade turret to make like a kind of cool bunker behind the volcano cannon, and then put some extra details around and had to play with mounting the first of my turrets, using lots of mini platforms to integrate them nicely, as well as the odd piece from the Manufactorum epic sprues, and I'm just loving how this first battlement has really kicked off. I moved along to the battlement above the gate and started knocking up a similar structure, although this time experimented with accentuating the shape of the gatehouse, so making the fortifications larger at the sides where it joins the two towers. I actually made this battlement in two halves to get it spaced evenly across the gate span, and it also made a sweet spot for a turret mount in the center, and the machicolations just look super menacing looking down over the causeway. Then it's time for more Dakar, starting off with some las cannon turrets that are going to cover the causeway. I created mini bastions using the same upside down epic wall tiles and Cities of Death buttresses as before, jazzing them up with some cabling and a turret mount this time that I kit bashed from the epic scenery Manufactorum sets. Then I've got two absolutely beast Vulcan mega bolters from the Stormlord Baneblade variant, which I then built a housing for out of foam so that I could mount them as like casemate emplacements, and I managed to keep their up and down rotation as well. And then the big decision is where to mount these, above the gate or on the chamfer of the towers. Now I could not decide, so thankfully I just made my Patreons in the Patreon Discord decide, which saved me like 20 minutes of solid agonizing, and they voted for the angle position to keep these as a like last line of defense right over the causeway. Seeing as the Baneblade parts are working brilliantly, I grabbed all of the large turret components of an actual Baneblade that I had left over when I made the Shadow Sword variant, who some of you might remember. I made it as complete as I could, and then knocked up a simple structure out of epic scale scenery pieces for the top of the second tower, and then extended the base of the Baneblade turret with some foam brickwork so I could mount the incomplete Baneblade armor plating and turret assembly right on top of the tower bastion. And after adding a few extra structures, we have got an awesome little fortified tower. So the battlements are looking amazing. There's a lot more work to do, more details and guns and cables, but before we do that, we're going to jump into the upper city and start to build the really elevated areas of the Imperial Palace. So the first thing we need in the upper city is elevators, so I grabbed some of the 40k scale Imperial buildings that we used for the archway doors in our lower city and knocked up a little entrance structure. And I was initially going to make this just a small little elevator access point, and then as I played around with some shapes in the city, I just fell in love with making this elevator an absolutely massive tower, hinting at the kind of upper levels of the city beyond our upper level. So I carved up a simple foam structure with 3 walls, leaving the back portion open for access, and then mounted our elevator access arch to the front. And then to start integrating this building with the rest of our city, it needed to be tricked out with a bunch of our epic scale scenery pieces. So I made up a couple of structures using these Civitas Imperial walls and spires mounted on top of our larger 40k scale archway. Then I grabbed a bunch of the Legions Imperialis road tiles and stuck them down in the upper city and cut in an access port for our elevator shaft to go down to the undercity and plonked down our tower, and that is going to work really nicely, but it's time for a lot more detail. I had a really fun idea that this elevator goes up and down with like a smaller infantry elevator to access some sort of bastion that's going to go on the top. So I made an elevator shaft out of Civitas walls, which I mounted to the front, and then I continued it all the way up to the top to make the fortified bastion on the top cohesively joined to the plastic details at the base. This should really tie the tower together and make it feel like a kind of cohesive structure rather than just random bits of plastic glued onto a foam box. I then built that upper bastion with a bunch of full-size and half-size Civitas walls, creating some really fun crenellation patterns to kind of capture the flavor of the castle vibe that we see in a lot of the Imperial Palace artwork by Neil Roberts for the Horus Heresy Siege of Terra series. Shout out to Neil if he's watching. And then I kept blending our foam and plastic components by creating lots of angled support structures to just break up the clean lines of the different components and get a really nice, successfully blended hybrid of plastic and foam. To really elevate the piece, I added more of our weapon mounts on the front and then added a set of buttresses in both foam and plastic civitas kits to keep blending those architectural styles across the whole tower. And I'm just so unbelievably happy with how this structure came out and how much it adds to the overall skyline of the whole palace board. It's official, the Imperial Palace is taller than me. Sometimes it is really fun to just go crazy on a stroke of inspiration and lean into the momentum of a new idea rather than being rigid and getting too stuck in your plans. Well, that is one elevator down, but now it's time for an even bigger one. And this next elevator is a huge vehicle lift for getting titans and tanks from the causeway up into the upper city. I started playing with industrial pieces from the Manufactorum kits, and I found these amazing little cranes which are going to become part of the lifting mechanism. So I knocked up 4 assemblies, 1 for each corner. Then for the lift itself, I built a little magnetizer ramp assembly using the awesome magnetization kits from the magnetbaron.com, and I kit bashed that with a bunch of Manufactorum pieces, and then just built a simple foam platform which I detailed with a few pillars of civitas buildings, which will become the elevator cable mounts, and then just a heap of plasteel and ceramite reinforced stonework consisted with all of the Imperial Palace architecture so far. Then in the upper city, I put in a bunch more of that stonework and ramps as well, and some chopped up Legions Imperialis road tiles, and fleshed out the main structures here and created a home for our elevator to operate, and then roughly installed our large silo gantries and the platform to make sure that it was all going to operate nicely together, and installing a few little extra Manufactorum details to start building up the mechanics of the elevator. So everything you've seen so far in this video is about 50 hours work, and I probably have enough footage for a normal video. But after the response to last week's video, we are going to do something special. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll link the video down in the description, but I was just blown away by the support that you guys gave both me and my family. Thank you so much to everyone who either joined the Patreon or became a channel member or went and bought supplies from my online shop that I'm closing down or super chatted. It was just super humbling. It's been a really hard 12 months, and the next 12 months could be even harder, but having you guys on this journey with me, it just gives my YouTube channel and Zorpazorp a fighting chance. I even managed to order some of the shelving units that we talked about in last week's video to try and organize some of this chaos. I'll show you those next week, but it is just so meaningful to everything we're doing here to have your support. So thank you so much. And I read through all the comments as well, thousands of them. You guys want to see finished boards, and so do I. Obviously, these boards are massive. We can't do them all in one video, but I thought today we could try and finish this part of the Imperial Palace. Instead of moving on to the next section of walls next and leveling up the whole build at once, let's throw down the final detailing and the paint and the weathering and get this piece complete so we can finally see a little chunk of what the Imperial Palace is going to look like. I knocked up one last building to fill out the streets in the upper city, and then it was finally time to glue in our gatehouse and start blending it into the walls. I grabbed some multi-purpose filler and slowly moved across the entire piece, filling and blending any strange gaps in our masonry, sometimes with a spatula or just getting messy with my fingers. Sometimes I needed to recarve some of the grout lines if the filler went a bit heavy, and any filler that spilled onto plastic detail can just be washed back with a wet toothbrush. Then it is detail time, and this is probably the most fun step of the whole process, and I could have easily spent days fiddling with all the various greeblies in the epic scale scenery kits. I decided that my first job was to better integrate that now glued in gatehouse with a series of plastic doorways nestled into the rear and the sides, using the large double-sized gates from the Civitas kits, because those can actually work at both 40k and epic scale. Next, another door on the side of the gatehouse, and then I started moving into smaller details. I grabbed some heavy stubbers, which can become like massive flat cannons at epic scale, and mounted a series of 5 covering the causeway from above, and then mounted another door to that battlement to keep blending my foam layers together. Down on the front of the gatehouse, I used some firing ports from the Baneblade kit to add some more kind of plastic detail to the lower chamfer of the bastions, and then it was time for piping. So much piping and cabling. A lot of you guys have been banging on about pipes in the comments, so buckle up for some major pipe porn. I clipped off every single piece of cabling and pipework from the epic scale Manufactorum kits, and then started mounting a whole range of different assemblies all across the back of the gatehouse to kind of jazz up the flat foam surfaces here. There are so many different adapters and pieces, as well as other detailed bits like these ventilation fans, which act as really cool focal points for the pipework, and those of course make sense on the back of the bastion. I also knocked up some nice little shield generators, one for each tower, as the bastion would be protected from a range of overlapping Aegis void shields, both small and large. I went to town on the rear facing sides, but then on the outer walls, I still used a little bit of these details because it just elevates the build so much, but I tried to make them feel thematically motivated, like a series of Promethean pipes feeding two heavy flamers that overlook the undergate, or power cabling for another small void shield generator protecting the lower bridges. I added a couple more of my firing positions, but I'm basically out of weapons in my bits box, so they're just going to be empty. I'll have to try and forage some more guns before my next build. And then one final detail on the very front of the gate, a nice little missile pod battery as a last resort for maximum extremis. And there we have the first section of the upper city completely ready for paint. And this time we're doing something a little different because this beast is just massive. So it's time for a big old spray gun and some house paint. I got the color to match my spray can primer, and the spray gun obviously doesn't melt foam like aerosol cans do, so it's a great first layer on the foam, and it's also insanely cheap in terms of paint. But the house paint doesn't really adhere to the plastic very well, so all the Games Workshop details got hit with my Rust-Oleum spray can primer first to get some nice adhesion in that base coat, and then once everything was wonderfully dark grey, I grabbed a light grey rattle can and applied a top-down zenithal to the entire board, using the angle of the can to help accent all of my carved and plastic details to maximum effect.
I'm such an idiot. There's no way I'm getting this painted today. I just planned out my scheme and it's like 30 or 40 hours to paint this piece. It's amazing. You don't read the details until you prime it and see the size of the blank canvas. So this is not getting finished today, but we got it primed and it looks amazing. And I'm glad we went the extra mile, but what I can promise you is that another video is coming up on this bad boy imminently. I'm diving straight into another whole month of work on this project, so buckle up. There's so much more Imperial Palace on the way. Another massive thank you to everyone who's joined the family and supported me over the last couple of weeks. It's been really, really humbling, and I'm so excited to keep working on stuff for you guys. Obviously, we're still in a bit of a gnarly position, but what you guys have done has just been incredible. If you want to keep the dream alive, go and check out our Patreon, link down in the description, or you can become a channel member here on YouTube. And for everyone who's rallied behind me, it's amazing. Thank you so much, and I cannot wait to see you again real soon for more Imperial Palace.
And don't forget to use my Raid Shadow Legends link in the description, or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses for new players with an epic champion.